Excellent. Forward, forward, always forward. Grit and growth mindset, and onwards we write. So we're going to use our write it forward strategy today, which essentially means that if you're moving through a sentence and you finish that sentence, instead of stopping and slowing down, push on, keep writing, move forward. Okay, so this is video number 2. We've already looked at the setup process for the first 3 steps. Now we're moving into the actual writing process. So just a reminder, every introduction paragraph has 3 important sections in it. Section 1 is the hook sentence, something that captures the reader's attention, hopefully. Sentence or section 2 is what we call the background sentences. And for this particular research essay, we'd want our background section to be 3 to 4 sentences long. We know the word requirements of this essay are a little bit longer. You should be aiming for about 1,500 words with this essay. So we can expand a little bit more in that section, in the background sentences section. And then section 3 of our introduction paragraph is the thesis statement. Now, just a reminder, your thesis statement also has 2 parts to it. It has the thesis punch, which really kind of tells your position or what you're going to argue or try to prove. And then the second portion is the guiding list, and that should predict the order of the main body paragraphs that will follow. So it's very obvious what the thesis does. It says, here's what I'm going to talk about, and these are the component parts or the order that I'm going to use to prove my positional statement, or what we call the thesis punch. Okay, so I've gone ahead just before creating this video this morning and I've written my first draft. So another thing to mention there is that when you're writing draft 1, you're not married and buried with that writing yet. You can always upgrade it, and that's why we use our write it forward strategy. It's better to push on, get some ideas down, and then we'll take a little bit of soak time. We know that's part of the writing process, right? So here we go. Let's take a look at what I came up with for my hook. So we know already that I'm going to be writing about prompt number 6, which is the looking at how the author uses stories, children's stories, parables, and fairy tales in particular, to kind of discuss some of the really serious themes that are part of this book's core. And so we can see that, yes, here it is, my rephrased prompt. So that's been done. So now let's go down and take a look at the hook. So remember, the hook, you really want to try to capture the reader's attention. So it should be something that's interesting or that comes at the question from a unique angle or that just has a really powerful image in it. So let's see what I came up here. Within the gingerbread house, comma, the witch uses children's sweet teeth to lay a cannibalistic trap, semicolon. Goldilocks is a cherub-cheeked thief with no morals, semicolon. And the broken king of eggs can never be healed. So we can see what I've done here. I've taken 3 images from 3 different fairy tales or parables, if you will, and I've kind of glued them together using semicolons, and all 3 of them are taking a kind of an interesting slant on these fairy tales, sort of trying to reveal some of the irony and some of the interesting aspect that sometimes these children's stories have a really serious message woven into their core, right? So obviously this first one is Hansel and Gretel, where they look for the gingerbread house and they end up getting captured by the witch and find out that she's trying to plump them up so that she can roast them. I mean, if you really boil it down, this is kind of a very grotesque, macabre story, right? And then we got Goldilocks, which almost makes light of the fact that you've got this young girl who comes in and really just takes over the bear's house and runs rampant and acts like a break and enter thief, really, and steals all their stuff, uses all their stuff, and doesn't seem to care about her actions, right? And then finally, the one that we really see, both actually the second and third one do connect directly to the novel, so there's some cleverness there on the essay writer's part as well. But last one's obviously a comparison to Humpty Dumpty, falling and breaking and then how he can't be put back together. So that's a fairly powerful hook because it's on topic, and I think it comes at it from a little bit of an oblique angle. It's kind of interesting. So now we know we're going to move into our background sentences. And the purpose of your background sentences is to provide a wider framework, kind of bring in some more information that is relevant to your main argument, but at the same time, it's not supposed to be your best ammunition yet. So let's see. Sentence 1. From Aesop's fables of Greece to Grimm's fairy tales from Germany, comma, children's stories have, historically, been used as message candy with bitter surprises within. So a few interesting things there. There's a bigger picture drawn from some of these other famous sources of stories that have messages. You can see I'm using our latest writing strategy, which is the removable phrase. And then, yeah, this idea, this message candy with a bitter surprise within, that's a metaphor. So I'm using some of our alpha level devices that we also hunt for in my own writing to show my skill as a writer. So then we move into background sentence number 2. Kogawa, comma, being a skilled savant of literature, comma, is aware of the loaded nature of parables and fairy tales, comma, and she wields irony-loaded children's stories in her novel Obasan to intertwine cultural messages and reveal the deep traumatic damage that was perpetrated against her family through the eyes of the young characters. So again, we can see I've used a couple of removable phrases. I've added a fairly advanced level of vocabulary, which we're hoping to see in this particular essay. And I'm leading towards what our thesis will be talking about with this idea of cultural messages and the damage that her family suffered. Now, this little chunk here is kind of interesting. This is what we call ellipsis. So I can actually remove these two words without damaging the grammar, but I'm just putting them in there to show you what the original sentence would have looked like. Sometimes things can be removed when they're not 100% necessary. As we know, that's also what we can do with removable phrases, right? We could take out this little chunk. Later, if we find that the essay is too wordy or we've gone over our word limit, one trick you can use is you can just go back through and start pulling out your removable phrases and see what your word count comes to at the end once you've done that revisional trick. Or revisionist trick, I guess. Okay, number 3 of our background sentences. Not only are this skillful author's choices deliberate, but they are also evolutionary, colon, even her selection of specific tales, comma, and their placement in relation to one another, comma, build and grow upon one another, leading towards an ultimate revelation about the internment experiences of Naomi Nakane, the protagonist. So it's a long sentence. It does have this big removable chunk in the middle here, a full clause. Actually, it's a phrase. It's just a phrase. But what we can see is that it's leading again towards the thesis. I think it's okay. There are a few pieces here that we could say are a little bit repetitive with the double use of one another here. We might want to change that. But again, it's draft 1, so we're going to write forward. So let's move on. Now, our thesis statement. Therefore, with support from scholarly sources, a critical analysis framework will be developed, I'll just highlight it for us, to interpret Kogawa's implementation of parables as message portals in Obasan through a multifaceted approach, colon. So here starts, so basically this bit here is my purpose punch or my positional statement or my thesis punch, whatever you want to call it. Those are all synonyms for one another. And it's basically saying, I'm going to look at the Kogawa's use of parables analytically in a framework pattern, which we've been using throughout, so that shouldn't be too difficult. And then I say it's going to be a multifaceted approach, which predicts that there's going to be a list coming next. And so then we move into our list, and this is our guiding list that will show, at least in draft 1, this is what I'm predicting my paragraphs will look like. So first we're going to have our analytical methodology. That's where I'm going to talk a little bit about my sources, probably developing ideas a little bit more about the role of fairy tales in literature and in culture. Then I move into my cultural focus. That'll be talking about the specific choices and how they have a cultural importance. Then we have fairy tales injected into alpha window devices. So this is something interesting that Kogawa actually does that I noticed in my active reading and with my annotation notes. That's step 2 and 3 of the process. So when I was doing my notes, I noticed sometimes she's twisting them around and making them into metaphors about the characters. And that's a really interesting choice. So I've chosen to devote an entire paragraph to analyzing that. And then finally, the synthesis aspect of how the children end up taking this idea and they actually end up creating one of their own sort of stories. And I think that that's actually quite important to investigate for this particular essay prompt. Okay, so we're at just about 10 minutes here for this video, so that's more than enough time. Hopefully this video has been a useful support tool for you. And if you wanted to see, here's what my paragraph would look like as an entire intro paragraph. And it came to 198 words. So we know that this essay is a little bit longer. So your introduction paragraph should be between 150 words and 200 words. Alrighty, good luck. I'll be on my computer today to check emails. So if you do have specific questions, don't hesitate to ask me.